Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. This is really an exciting occasion for us. I'm Kamari Clarke, a professor at the Center for Criminology and Sociolegal Studies, as well as the director for the program here at University of Toronto. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 27th annual John J. Edwards Memorial Lecture. So before we go any further with tonight's proceedings, I'd like to welcome Charley, McNeil, and Breanna Lachmanen, two of our undergraduate students, to lead us in a land acknowledgement. So please welcome.
We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land.
Hi, everyone. I also wanted to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the Criminology and Sociolegal Studies Students Association. So my name is Charley, and I'm the president, and Breanna is our vice president. And at its heart, CRIMSA is about building a strong and connected student community. We aim to give undergraduates a wide range of academic and social opportunities to explore their interests, broaden their skills, and connect with one another and faculty and professionals. This year, we'll be hosting our third annual academic symposium, which celebrates undergraduate research and academic excellence. It's a space where students can present papers they've written in their classes with peers and a panel of judges, with recognition given to the top 3 works at the end of the event. We're also organizing our second criminal mock trial, which invites students of all experience levels to explore legal reasoning and advocacy in a practical and engaging setting. We're deeply grateful to the Center, our faculty, and the graduate community for the support, mentorship, and time you continue to give our initiatives. Together, we're helping our students not only study this discipline, but experience what it means to be part of a thoughtful, passionate, and growing academic community.
Okay, thank you, Charley and Breanna. So first, let me welcome you all. We welcome the Edwards family here, and of course the Honorable Harold Lovell from Antigua and Barbuda, other dignitaries, graduates, alumni, colleagues, students, and of course friends. So we welcome you to our annual John Edwards Memorial Lecture. For the past 27 years, the Center for Criminology and Sociolegal Studies has held this annual lecture to honor the memory of our founder, John Jones Edwards, a Welsh-born legal scholar whose vision and leadership transformed the field of criminology in Canada. Born in 1915, Edwards earned his bachelor degree at the University of Wales and began a career in law, which was interrupted by service in British forces during World War II in West Africa. Now, after the war, and many of you may very well know this history, but let me just say that after the war, of course, part of the lineage here that we certainly claim is that he pursued advanced studies, ultimately obtaining 5 doctorates and 3 honorary degrees, and taught at Cambridge University and Queen's University in Belfast. In the late 1950s, Professor Edwards would move to Canada and take up the position at the Faculty of Law at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. And of course, this move proved consequential for the field of criminology and the Canadian justice system, as Professor Edwards his work at Dalhousie would heavily influence the discipline of criminology and the development of criminal law and criminal justice in Canada. Now, by the early 1960s, recognizing the need for teaching and research that responded to the unique needs of the Canadian justice system, Professor Edwards was invited to the University of Toronto, and it was here that he founded the Center for Criminology. The center, of course, many of you know, moving forward some years, the Center of Criminology then became the Center for Criminology and Sociolegal Studies, what we call CRIMSL, or some of us call CrimSL. The center, of course, was the first of its kind in Canada, with plans to create a master's teaching program, to house an extensive collection of criminal and legal materials, as well as to expand the field through multidisciplinary faculty. So it was Professor Edwards who encouraged this unique way of approaching criminology and fostered research on crime that straddled and challenged, in many ways, disciplinary boundaries. Indeed, what we take for granted as interdisciplinarity, a hallmark of our work today, was something that someone like Professor Edwards truly had to fight for. And likewise, Professor Edwards fought for greater funding to ensure the success of the study of criminology. And of course, in 1972, as the story goes, the Center for Criminology was offered a public grant to support its work on the condition that the government would reserve the right to determine whether research findings should be made public or not. And of course, this fight for funding became a fight for academic freedom as Professor Edwards engaged in a lengthy dispute, taking his concerns to the media, where he stood firm on his belief to insist on the freedom of publication. And so this, of course, is part of the lineage that we claim. And I'll just tell you a small anecdote, which I think is worth marking in many ways as we reflect on the future of our field. A Toronto Star quoted a Metro judge who regarded Professor Edwards as, quote, one of the greatest and gutsiest, most intelligent academics in North America, end quote. So for 60 years since its founding, faculty, librarians, students have worked to uphold this legacy, Professor Edwards' legacy of gutsy excellence in interdisciplinary studies, certainly in the field of criminology and socio-legal studies. And then building from this legacy, the center has transformed into a world-renowned multidisciplinary research hub, offering comprehensive undergraduate, master's, and PhD programs, engaged community-facing research, and as well as expansive transnational and multidisciplinary work. And for over a century now, the Center has welcomed many distinguished scholars of criminology and socio-legal studies from Canada and around the world to deliver this lecture. Past speakers have included Lucia Zedner, Prabna Kotswaran, Val Napoleon, John Simon, last year Senator Kim Pate. And we're grateful to welcome our 2025 keynote lecturer, Professor Reuben Miller, to this list of distinguished orators. And so without further ado, let me welcome Professor Scot Wortley to the stage. And Professor Wortley will be introducing our guest. So just a couple of words about Professor Wortley. He's been a professor here at the Center for Criminology and Socio-Legal Studies at the University of Toronto since 1996. And if you ever get a chance to, for those of you who don't know Scot Wortley, he certainly is a storyteller and is one of those storytellers about our tradition, probably one of beyond our dear faculty who are emeritus, probably the longest standing professor in our unit at the moment. His academic career began in the 1990s as a researcher with the Commission on Systemic Racism in the Ontario criminal justice system, and he's now considered one of Canada's leading criminologists. Over the past 30 years, Professor Wortley has conducted numerous studies on various issues, including youth violence and victimization, street gangs, drug trafficking, and substance use, the effectiveness of community crime prevention programs, crime and violence within the Caribbean, public perceptions of the police and criminal courts, police in schools, the use of force, racial bias within the criminal justice system, and the list goes on. In 2017, Professor Wortley worked with the Ontario Anti-Racism Directorate to develop standards and guidelines for the collection and dissemination of race-based data within the public sector. And so it's wonderful to invite Professor Wortley to join us here to the stage to introduce our guest speaker. So please join me in welcoming Professor Wortley.
I'm actually a little bit apprehensive giving this talk right now. I was giving a talk yesterday, the Justice Conference on Spadina, and it was a raised stage. And there was kind of like those wedding tables where people were finishing up lunch. And as I started to talk, mice started to emerge from the baseboards, and I stayed quiet And then mid-speech, people started to notice the mice, and people were screaming. And so I haven't seen anything yet, but I didn't know if they were screaming at the mice or my talk. So it was. It's nice. I haven't noticed any holes in the baseboards here. So, thank you, everyone, for attending this a very special occasion. I will begin my remarks, and I'd like to thank Kelly Hanamafik, who's a close colleague of Professor Miller, for helping prepare these comments. To begin, there are few true optimists in this world. Those who are acutely aware of the layers of injustice within systems and societies, and yet fundamentally believe that change is possible. A kind of change that is possible not just in the abstract sense, but in the human sense, meaning that it is achievable by all of us if we summon our common humanity. Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller is this kind of optimist. Professor Miller is an associate professor at the University of Chicago Crown Family School and in the Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity, and a research professor at the American Bar Foundation. His research, which focuses on race, punishment, and social welfare policy, is published in journals across the social sciences. In 2021, Professor Miller published his first sole-authored book, Halfway Home: Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration. Halfway Home draws on 15 years of research and practice, as well as a lifetime of experience, including his years as a voluntary chaplain at the Cook County Jail in Chicago. Halfway House has won a number of major awards, including the 2023 Michael J. Hindelang Award from the American Society of Criminology, the 2022 Herbert Jacob Book Prize from the Law and Society Association, and 2 Prose Awards from the Association of American Publishers, including the Award for Excellence in Social Science. Halfway Home is also a finalist in the LA Times Book Prize for Current Affairs and the PEN American John Kenneth Galbraith Award for Nonfiction. In 2022, Professor Miller was selected as a MacArthur Fellow, the so-called Genius Award, with the prize committee noting that Miller is modeling a way to write about his subjects that refuses to reduce them to their hardships. And he's illuminating how the American carceral system reshapes individuals' lives and relationships long after their time has been served. Through his articles in Law and Society Review, as well as Time Magazine, Theoretical Criminology, and the Huffington Post, he has become an influential voice in current conversations about crime, violence, race, and penal reform. Professor Miller is currently conducting a transnational study of Black emancipation in port cities along the transatlantic slave route, and a study of violence and our responses to it. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Professor Miller until today, but many of us are very familiar with his work. As described above, Professor Miller's research examines the impacts of incarceration on individuals and society, how individuals who have served their time are failed in so many ways by an expectation of rehabilitation that is not supported by a robust system of care. In his work, Professor Miller rejects a position of objectivity and neutrality towards the issues he probes. He believes there is much to be learned from closeness to people experiencing systemic barriers. He identifies the fears that societies encourage their citizens to hold about those who have done harm and made poor choices. He also practices a form of radical hospitality that does not measure an individual's worth or citizenship by their criminal record. Professor Miller takes this compassionate, human-centered approach to his teaching and mentorship. His generosity as a mentor and role model both to colleagues and junior scholars is well known. He encourages them to build on and share gratitude for the work of others. He engages deeply in their ideas while enabling them to follow their own path. He urges students to keep asking, in his words, really cool questions by connecting research to human experience. So, on behalf of the Center for Criminology and Sociolegal Studies, I would now like to welcome Professor Miller to the University of Toronto. We are so thankful that you were able to escape the possible military occupation of Chicago to join us here today. We are extremely fortunate to have Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller as our guest today and have the opportunity to listen to him speak about his research and reflections, the least, violence, the vulnerable, and the promise of Black freedom in a new world. As we do, I hope we can start reimagining together the kind of world that we want to live in. Professor Miller.
Thank you so much. Wow, I am blown away. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. I very much appreciate it. I wonder who you're talking about. Like, you know what I mean? Like who is he talking about? Is he talking about me? Okay, anyway. But thank you. So it's so wonderful to be here with you. I'm grateful to Professor Clarke for the invitation, and to Pat Doherty for your hospitality and making sure that things worked to get here, and to old friends and new, to Kelly Hannah Moffitt, to Paula Marudo, and to new friends we're meeting today. Scott, thank you. It's a great pleasure to meet you, and others. Thank you for your hospitality. I think hospitality is something that we desperately need, and something that I think is the answer to some of our most pressing questions. But also thank you to you. It's cold outside. You could be doing anything else. You decided to hang out with me. Thank you. So I'm doing a project on Black freedom and a project on its relationship to violence and how we respond to it, and the moral worlds we construct around and about people who are members of what my dear friend Waverly Duck will call dispreferred groups. And so to do a little of that, I need to talk a bit about the genesis of the project. The title comes from a scripture. So Scott noted that I was a volunteer chaplain at the Cook County Jail. I did that work from 2003 to 2008. This, of course, is the height of mass incarceration in the United States. This is when we arrested more people than we did the year before at a faster rate than we did the year before, and we did that for 27 straight years. And so during the years that I was spending time in the Cook County Jail, the number of people held in American jail or prison was at something like 2.4 million people. So 2008 was the highest year. But in my jail, there were 10,000 people on any given day held in the facility that I worked, and I worked medium, minimum, and maximum security. Anyway, so to say something about the genesis of that work, there was a scripture that punched me in the chest. I'm not going to proselytize. I promise. I won't hand you a brochure when you walk out the door. I promise. I will not invite you to church. Don't worry about it, unless you come to Chicago, and then I'll send you an invitation anyway. But but this is Matthew 25. It's a fairly famous scripture in the Christian tradition. I won't read it, but there's a popular part of the passage that asks the so-called righteous whether or not they cared for the vulnerable. The questions are from the question from the king or the thing that we call God or the sovereign or however you want to think about this. There's a series of questions. One of which is how did you respond to me? And he asked, were you there for me when I was hungry? When I was thirsty? When I was a foreigner, did you let me in? When I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? And I hadn't heard that part. I hadn't heard the sick and in prison part when I was a younger man. And so this started my trajectory in the work. The work to imagine a world that perhaps punishes less. And the older I get, I'm wanting to imagine a world that doesn't respond to need with punishment at all. I came to understand that the vulnerability perhaps was the problem that we kept responding to with things like the prison. We'll talk about that in a hot second. So I began working as a volunteer chaplain. And when I got there, I was struck by what I saw inside. Why so many prisoners looked like I looked. That is to say, looked like me. That is to say, people were Black and poor and from neighborhoods that I came from. I was running into my neighbors. I was running into my friends. I was running into people I grew up with. Folks showing up at the chapel, for example, like my guys when I was coming up. Eventually, my brother would go to prison, two of my brothers, in fact. And I learned my father had done time when I met him. So I really wanted to understand it. And I went to school to study what we call mass incarceration. And I won't talk about so much of that today, but I will say a few years later, I returned to that jail and sat with the director of educational programs inside. Now, this is a site where kids who by law and right must be in school because they're minors and the state holds custody over them. So many young boys who held weapons or were in gangs or made mistakes or did nothing at all. This was the population. And I sat across from the director and I asked him about his work. And he said to me, he said, he thought about his own kids. He said, when I come to work each day, I think about my grandson. We're all there. There are many of us who just sit around. We're waiting around for him to do something good, to do something right. And we cheer, he said. We cheer whenever he does something right. My guys don't have that, he went on. My guys are so well known, but so poorly understood. His guys. Now, his guys had done bad things. His guys committed acts of violence. His guys were the objects of fear and disdain, and maybe rightfully so. But when I thought about his guys, and I thought about what I experienced as a volunteer chaplain, I was unsurprised to see, perhaps a decade later, something alarming in the news. So he knew they were in jail. At least he thought they were in jail because they were misunderstood. He thought that they were children. Even as young as 14, 15, 16, here they are sitting in the Cook County Jail. And so when I thought about his work and I thought about his guys, I was unsurprised to see the depths of our disdain for children like them. They're viewed as violent threats instead of children in need. So when I opened the paper and I saw a lawsuit from the Department of Children and Family Services, or against the Department of Children and Family Services, I was unsurprised. It's because of our inability to see children as children, which is to say, these people who may have caused harm as people. It leads us to a very dark place. In this case, the guardian ad litem is suing the Department of Children and Family Services. Why? Because DCFS has taken custody of these children, and they have committed a crime, perhaps. They have done all their time. This is true. A judge has ordered that they all be released, every one of these kids, but there were dozens of kids sitting in Cook County Jail, not because they had committed a crime, because they had done that already and done their time. They couldn't find a placement for these kids. No foster home. No facility, no group home, no care facility said they had room for them. They said that they were, in fact, unsuitable placements for these kids. So here these kids are, long past the day they were supposed to be released, ordered by a judge to find placement, only to find there's no place in the world for them. Even the foster care system. Because these are children for which we've learned to hold in our minds in fear and disregard. Our fear makes sense. We're afraid of the violent, people who've caused harm. This is the group I'm most curious about, though, the violent, about people we've learned to fear. But we must understand why we fear them. Why do we respond to need in this way, need from these people in this way? So much so that even the foster care system doesn't see itself as being equipped to handle the danger that they pose. So to do that, I have to think about how and why we've come to presume these kids to be guilty in the first place. Guilty of any time committing some violent act. So I want to think with you together during this time about Black guilt as a thing, and conversely, Black innocence, and the way that guilt flows within and between people and institutions, and the association of guilt with violence, or better still, the ways that the flow of Black guilt supports and produces violence. So I want to bring us to the present to open with a police encounter. A video surfaces from Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is you all know Illinois. This is a place in Michigan. It's March of 2017, or you all know the U.S. The view is from an officer's chest cam. We're looking down the barrel of an already drawn gun, and we see that there are 5 Black boys in the distance. Guys, get on the ground. Keep your hands up, the officer says. The orders come calm but quickly. The footage reveals the boy's personality. One is obedient but shaken. He lays face down during most of the ordeal. Another fidgets, unsure of whether to stay on his belly or to walk toward the officer. "What did we do, bro?" asks a third prone boy, his head and arms raised awkwardly. The fourth boy whimpers, "I don't want to die." Was this the youngest child? The boys reportedly are between 12 and 14 years old. The fifth boy, the one in black, is noticeably angry. "Can you please put down your gun?" He stands repeating his request. "Put down your gun," the boy asks. "Hey," shouts the officer, "don't come over here." The murmuring 12-year-old begins to wail, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die," he says again, crying. Seeing the action from her stoop, the mother of one of the boys moves toward the fray. "Ma'am, can you get back in your house for me?" the officer says firmly. "Impossible. There's a gun drawn on her child." Ma'am, shouts the officer as she approaches. The scene fades to black. An officer is now talking to two parents. "We're just doing our job because a lot of people have guns," they say. A father says, "You're saying they didn't have guns, but y'all pulled y'all guns?" "We don't know that," the officer replies firmly. A mother, the one who went to her child, interrupts. "Exactly," she says. "They didn't have guns, but y'all pulled y'all guns on my kid." The officer responds politely but firmly, "Do you understand where we're coming from? Matching description. We're not just going to walk up to someone and say, 'Hey, do you have a gun?' No one got hurt in this. Wrong place at the wrong time. Obviously for these kids," says the officer. "Right place at the wrong time. They were in the right place," says the father. The footage ends. There was, of course, no weapon. The mother's impulse to go to her child being held at gunpoint and the confusion, fear, and frustration of the boy should make sense to most observers. Why would a mother stand by and watch while police officers point guns at her child? Why would a mother stand by and watch? Why wouldn't a 12-year-old fear for his life? I suppose the family should have been thankful that no one was hurt. Much worse has happened under hauntingly similar circumstances. The boys' parents were familiar with the cruel and remarkable history that confronts their boys each time they leave the home. Grand Rapids, like many American cities, had recently commissioned a stop and frisk study, and they found that racial disparities in police procedures were as bad as anywhere else. Black people were stopped at twice the rate of whites, but were less likely to carry guns or drugs. Wrong place at the wrong time. At a park, a playground, a street outside their home. There's no right place for these children. Innocence in childhood may be synonymous in the American imagination, but our children, that is to say black children, are presumed guilty. The point I was saying. I say children because it doesn't just happen to boys. 11-year-old Honesty Hodges was held at gunpoint by the Grand Rapids police, same police station, around the same time as this encounter. She was made to walk backwards, her hands in the air, but in her case, it was from the doorway of her home. Her mother pleaded, she's only a child. The police were searching for her aunt, Carrie Manning, so there was somebody connected to her who had committed an awful crime. Carrie Manning, this is a 42-year-old white woman, stabbed her little sister, Carrie's little sister. This child, who was not 42 or white, screamed no as they put her in handcuffs. That she didn't resemble Carrie didn't matter. Honesty, whose life changed all of ours, tragically died during the COVID-19 pandemic in a moment when we as a nation failed to admit that our children, especially black children, were vulnerable to the virus. How did we get here? I'm sure that it was surprising when the police chief apologized to the boys' families in his public statement, the 5 black boys held at gunpoint. Within the hour, 2 police officers' unions issued a joint statement of their own. The officers followed protocol, they said, and protocol would not change. But why is this the protocol? In some ways, this is an old story, and I'll tell it quickly. It'd be tempting to start with the war on drugs and the advent of modern policing, but our presumptions of black guilt and the collective sin that renders black people criminal emerge with the concept of race itself. This is because the idea of black people, uniform and constituted as such, is a child of racial slavery. Before that, neither European aristocrats calling for unfree labor, nor the raiders they sent to plunder the African continent, nor the networks of merchants or middlemen or brokers, nor the warrior aristocracies that captured people and supplied slaves to the coast, which is to say that entire network of black people who were deeply involved in slavery themselves, thought of black people as a people at all. They were outsiders, foreigners like the Eastern Europeans and the classes of so-called barbarians who were traded by warring empires. Saidiya Hartman, the eminent scholar of transatlantic slavery, whose work I'm drawing from here, put it best. Africans did not sell their brothers and sisters into slavery. They sold strangers, those outside the web of kin and clan relationships, foreigners and barbarians, lawbreakers expelled from society. In order to portray your race, you had to first imagine yourself as one, she writes. Now, in the social hierarchy that existed, slaves were at the bottom, but the exclusive trade in Africans as slaves wasn't established until the 15th century. Before then, most captives were Eastern Europeans. In fact, the word Slav comes from the word slave comes from the word Slav, as many of you know. But the main point here is that an entire people were branded and marked. It was the salvation of lost black souls that drew King John to Western Africa, or at least that's what his biographer said in the first written defense of the European slave trade. His mission in Africa, and by extension, the purpose of slavery itself, was to save the lost African who's considered dark, beastly, naked, and undifferentiated, an entire people guilty of sin, shiftless, lawless, godless. And there was violence. And that violence wasn't just from the European traders. African captives fought back in their villages, in ports, in shipyards, and at sea, and they rebelled in the New World colonies, and in the barracoons, and on the auction block. A whole history of resistance to capture. A whole history of violence for the purpose of black freedom. Sometimes joining with indigenous people who died by the thousands resisting captivity. Sometimes joining with indentured servants whose quality of life wasn't much better. It was after these violent rebellions, these forced expressions of freedom, that the separation of races and a collective notion of black guilt was established. The separation of so-called black and white people took place across law and everyday life. Slave codes outlawed the vestiges of black freedom. Miscegenation becomes a crime, reading a crime, traveling without papers a crime, work shortage is a crime, escape certainly a crime. According to political theorist and abolitionist Andrew Dilts, escape was the crime of stealing oneself. All of these so-called crimes associated with Negro insurrection. To combat solidarity across racial lines, white servants are given new freedoms. These are things that many people in this room know. They were allowed to settle Indian land and permitted to punish enslaved and free black people. The word white gets used for the first time in print to describe people of European descent, and these newly white people began to identify with the masses they once opposed. While these sharp lines separated the so-called races, they also separated black people, including black children, from any presumption of innocence. This is the point. While the fear of black insurrection was real and palpable, it is not to say that black violence was not a thing. It was a thing. 1 in 10 slave voyages, there were rebellions on 1 in 10 slave ships. And white slave patrols, constables, and eventually the police, what will become the police, stood at the ready to beat back black rebellion. The way that black people were depicted in popular culture changed after emancipation. I'm not keeping up with my slides, but this is an image from Robin Bernstein's fantastic book on racial innocence, and it shows depictions of children. On the one hand, there's the black child who is comfortable with the labor of picking cotton, and a white child picking cotton also, who is the mule. And you see how this imagery happens. But in the words of the historian David Levering Lewis, the African American becomes demonized after emancipation. A threat, a lascivious beast who roams the countryside of the South, people loosed by the end of slavery, now upon us like locusts. The idea of black criminality preoccupied Americans' minds. Police in the South rounded up thousands of black people for failing to work, for attempting to leave, for the so-called crime of being idle. And the convict leasing system balloons. As newly freed slaves and their children were recaptured and used to rebuild the South. This was the first form of mass incarceration in my country, with incarcerated population in southern states more than tripling between 1865 and 1890. And there was over-incarceration in the North as black workers fled racial terror to arrive in the slums of Chicago, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and New York. This is the story of the Great Migration. From the tabulating of black crime in ways that erased the criminality of white immigrants, to the many wars on the poor, the war on crime, the war on drugs, and to some extent the war on poverty, black people are over-incarcerated and increasingly treated like criminals. This is a very brief social history of black guilt. From the moment of the Portuguese encounter with Africans, who first viewed them as undifferentiated, naked, lawless, godless, who made a people out of whole cloth, but didn't assign to them violence or violent acts. To this new moment where Black folks are deeply associated with violence. A people get made out of a set of market logics, out of efficiencies. It's from efficiencies you make a people. Through efficiencies you label them violent. And of course, this reflects a reality. I mentioned that revolts were a part of capture. Revolt and violent revolt. At least 1 in 10 revolts on 1,400 ships that we know that crossed the Atlantic. And revolt on so many plantations and from so many relations of capture. In the field, in the big house, in homes of Black women's employers, on the factory floor, on the streets later of Harlem and Black Bottom in Detroit and Watts and a million neighborhoods in between where Black people find themselves relegated. There is real violence. Both violence against their white captors, violence against the police, violence against each other. The moniker of Black violence was almost always deployed, though, at the moment of Black freedom. The conceptualization of what we might call Black violence, and by extension Black guilt, gets deployed at the moment of Black emancipation, which comes about in the wake, and some scholars would say, because of the revolts. This is not just the establishment of guilt, but the erasure of innocence. A kind of racial innocence. And by racial innocence, I mean what Robin Bernstein, the historian, meant, the separation of Black children from their innocence, where Black children were pictured in the progressive era as fit for certain kinds of labor, as I showed. What I call Black guilt is therefore a material relation. It springs from material relations. In this case, the configuration of a labor market in a given moment in time, but also the configuration of a culture to respond to it, which rises to meet, shapes, and is shaped by the needs and requirements of a new political economy. Of fear brought about through efficiencies. We might say Black guilt is also brought about through convenience. And those fears show up in our laws and our policies. Today, 44,000 laws, policies, administrative sanctions to target people with criminal records, creating new material conditions. One that bars them from the political economy and culture, from the very social life of the city, in fact, making them hang in the city's wake. These are policies directed at the kinds of people that we're afraid of to protect us from the violence that comes about in the wake of their freedom. No place for these babies because we're afraid of where they might go. No place for these children, despite having served all the time, despite an order from a judge, not even by the place designed to hold them, DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services, because we're afraid of their freedom. There's no suitable placement, they said. It took a lawsuit to get them out of jail. This is the through line. Public safety, public protections, all from the presumption of violence. What I'm calling guilt that produces and precedes forms of racial violence. Efficiencies produce them. Shorthand produces them. Material relations produce them. Black guilt is a material relation. The 1990s brought us visions of wayward Black children as super predators marauding across a dystopian urban landscape in the U.S. The most recent progressive explanation for so-called Black dysfunction and Black guilt is that Black youth are disconnected, they say, from school and from work. In any case, Black children are viewed as a problem. No wonder Black people are twice as likely to be arrested than whites and 5 times more likely to be incarcerated. No wonder they serve longer sentences for the same crimes. No wonder unarmed Black boys are 21 times more likely to be killed by the police than unarmed white boys. One study found that over a third of Black boys will be arrested by the time they turn 18. Nearly half will be arrested by the time they turn 23. This is itself a shame, but a deeper one is that 39% of white boys will be arrested before they turn 23 in the United States. But we don't talk about that because we've so associated Blackness with violence and guilt. This is how we've come to the crisis of mass incarceration. And while we know from our flesh the world's most famous graph, we experience it every day. 1 in 2 Americans, 2/3 of Black Americans find their way in a jail or prison. So what is mass incarceration? It's a series of crises. It's a crisis of racial justice for those who believe in justice. I mentioned those stats. It's a public health crisis. We know things like HIV prevalence is 5 times higher in American jails or prisons than they are in the general population. Hepatitis C, 9 times higher. We know that most communicable diseases pass through a prison in the year before it expressed itself in the general population. We know it's a rapidly aging population. We know that there are negative health and mental health effects of the prison. We know that for every year someone spends in an American jail or prison, that social scientists have told us using insurance tables, that they lose 2 years off the life course. We knew all this before COVID-19. But it's a mental health crisis. A great chunk of folks inside have a serious mental illness, but we also know that in the United States, jails and prisons represent 44, are the largest mental health providers in 44 out of 50 states. But it's also a crisis of disability. 38% of people inside experience some sort of disability, whether that's cognitive or visual disability, an ambulatory disability. I can't tell you how many guys I spent time with who just couldn't rotate their shoulders right after a minute, who had terrible back pains. You all know this. You all study this. In many ways not saying anything new. I hope I'm just bringing things together. It's also a homelessness crisis. People we lock away are 7 times more likely to experience homelessness in the U.S. And those incarcerated once were 13 or more than once were 13 times more likely to experience homelessness. Black women were the most housing unstable of the group. So the question for us is as we think about crime rates as they drop and incarceration rates as they expanded and now are starting to tail off, we can have a whole conversation about where we are in time and space, is whether or not this is about violence at all, or is this about vulnerability? Is this about our hatred of the vulnerable, our disdain for the weak? And if it is, which I think it is, then that means mass incarceration was an act of state-sanctioned community violence. It's because community is where the action is. The prison is just a small slice of a much more vast carceral network, as you all know well. This is a screenshot of the National Inventory of the Collateral Consequences of a Criminal Conviction. Is a number of laws, policies, administrative sanctions tabulated by the American Bar Association. It started about 15 years ago or so, and they started counting how many laws target people with criminal records, and because people have criminal records. And when they finished counting, they counted at the time during the first count there were 48,000. After some adjustments to not overcount or double count, we're now around 44,000 laws, policies, administrative sanctions. This is the legal production of vulnerability. We talked about violence. We're now talking about the vulnerable, who I think are one and the same. We're talking about the legal production of vulnerability. So what this means in most states is that you can't hold public office. In my home state of Illinois, you couldn't be a dog groomer. You can have your parental rights revoked. You can be fired on a whim. There are very few places where you can rent a place. You're locked out of the political economy and culture, is the point here. So what does this look like on the ground? What's this? You talked about me being an optimist. I'm sorry, Scott. I'm very sorry. But what does this look like on the ground? I'd like to tell you a story about a drug robber named Lorenzo who comes home. And then maybe we can pivot and I'll sit down. But Lorenzo gets out. He does 9 years in his last bit, and he had been arrested many times for many things. But the important thing to remember is that Lorenzo was, in his earlier life, a dangerous man. He carried guns, he shot people, he hurt people. This is what he did. And so, hey, what's up? It's good to see you. And so, Lorenzo, I'm seeing you in some years. And so Lorenzo sort of gets out, and here he is. Here Lorenzo is, after his last bit, he gets out, he does 9 years in, and he's released, and he's given the rules. And so he's handed a sheet of paper called conditions of release. These are things that you must do and things that you must not do. And so the must not do's are like, do not associate with known offenders. How do you do that in a neighborhood where 80% of the people have been to jail or prison? I don't know. It's an unenforceable rule, but it is what it is. He's given this sheet of paper that tells him what he must not do. You must abstain from alcohol, even though he's an adult and of legal age to drink. You must abstain from drugs. You must follow all the laws, including these 48,000 laws. But anyway, you need to, and then the must do. So the conditions of release are don'ts, and then the do's. The do's are you must report to your probation officer, or your you must check in. You must piss in a cup. You must get a job. You must attend workforce development training. You must go to substance release. So he knocks on the door of the halfway house he was told he must report to, and he's carrying his things in a black plastic garbage bag, and he's got on the kinds of plastic boots that give men blisters, because he doesn't have a social network of any regard that he can turn to for support. And besides, boots on the inside cost 3 times what they cost on the outside. And he's got on his fresh fish khakis because his clothes are disintegrated, because they lose everybody's stuff somehow. Somehow the locker doesn't work. I don't know, but his stuff is gone. And he knocks on the door, and then the person at the front door opens the door, lets him in, and goes over the rules. No guests, no pets. Get a food stamp card. We'll use that food stamp card. We'll collect it from the 15 other men that are going to be in this room with you. They'll sleep on bunk beds. You'll get one of those racks. We'll use that for food. You owe us $400 a month rent. Must be paid on the 1st. Now, remember, you're not a formal tenant with formal tenant's rights. And besides, this isn't a lease. This is a halfway house. This is more like what my grandmother would have called a flop house. There's no eviction notice. The day you don't pay that rent is the day you're outdoors. And so here he is on his 28th day of almost freedom, knowing his $400 is looming. And he hasn't yet found a job because he's a dangerous man with a warranted conviction for a gun offense. There's no way he's getting a job in the United States with 19,000 labor market restrictions. And so his question is, where does he get the money to pay the rent? Where does he get the $400 from? Even if he got a job at minimum wage, would he have made $400 after taxes? I'm not sure. But no one would hire him anyway. Here he is on the 28th day of his almost freedom. He's gathered his things in a black plastic bag, and he begins walking the neighborhood. He's trying to clear his head. He's trying to figure out his next thing. And what does he see? Lorenzo was a drug robber. He sees 2 dope boys, he says, talking they shit, flashing their little cash, he says. And the question for us is, what would you do if you were him? I asked him. He said, I stood on that corner, man, and I cried. I stood on that corner and I cried. This is the price of an alternate legal reality that he's made to traverse. It is an alternate form of citizenship for people with criminal records. I've written about this before. I won't stay here. But this is the exclusion from the political economy and culture. This is laws on top of laws, not just the rules that we all have to follow, the 48,000 that follow you because you've got a criminal record, and then the laws on top of laws you're handed when you walk out the door, the conditions of release, which are not codified law in any state. But if you violate them, you can be rearrested. This is a form of state-sanctioned violence. I say state-sanctioned because this is legal. This is warranted. This is wanted. It's what we decided to do with this group of people as the primary response to his vulnerability. But violence produces more violence. If you ask me what I would do, I would rob those boys. I would just tell you, right? Like it would just happen. Sorry, guys. Like me or you? I hope to be a better guy. I hope in my heart of hearts that I will be better. You know, I've got all kinds of righteous songs playing in my head at most times, and I will probably rob these boys. But it's not just like this in the United States. Oftentimes in our discussions of penal exceptionalism, we don't think about I think, what happens in other places in ways that are robust enough. So I came to Canada to talk to y'all about the United States. Sorry. You know what I mean? But it's not just like that in the U.S. It's like this in many places all over the world, and even in places that we think of as progressive. France and the problem of its over incarceration of Muslims, the so-called new slavery laws that we see implemented in the prosecution of joint enterprise crimes in the UK, so that if you're on the group chat with one of the guys who's committed a crime, you can be arrested if you're one of the boys on a group chat in the UK. The no-go zones in Sweden. When I was doing some work in Malmo, interviewing prisoners in the prison in Malmo, trying to understand their experiences. And when I was there about a decade or so ago, the most popular show on TV at the time was a show called The Bridge. There was an adaptation of The Bridge, which is all about drug crime committed mostly by Middle Eastern folks coming across the bridge from Copenhagen. This giant popular show. And then if you just ask the question of what happens to foreign nationals in these places, a third or more of prisons in all the Nordic the countries that we say are progressive, Norway, Denmark, etc. Foreign nationals overrepresent prisons there. I don't need to get on Canada and talk about what's going down with indigenous people here, where racial disparities for indigenous people are worse than they are in the United States. So the prison is minuscule. You all know that, so I don't have to talk about it. But I will talk about a case of this kind of violence that we see, and then I'll pivot and talk about how long do I have? What time is it? Is it 5 minutes? Okay. So I will talk about a case very quickly, and then I'll pivot and talk about a response to it. And so I want to tell you a bit about Sarah Reid. I'll tell it and fast forward. Sarah Reid is a case of a woman in the UK, and Sarah Reid is having has just had a baby. So she just had a family, and she just had a baby. We learn about her because of what happens with the baby. And so she goes to the hospital, and she goes to the hospital a number of times, 5 in fact. And she says to the medical folks at the hospital that her baby is having trouble breathing. They say to her, "It's a cold, it's regular, don't worry, go back." She gets turned away 5 times. On the 5th time, you see where this story is going. The baby stops breathing. The baby never breathes again. So Sarah is distraught enough, but Sarah is told by the workers at the hospital, the nurse, the medical officers, etc., that what she needs to do, because the baby is dead, is she needs to transport the baby to the medical director's office. And so Sarah wraps her baby in a blanket, and she and her partner take a cab to drop off the remains. And that would be enough if Sarah wasn't caught trespassing in 2012 on CCTV. And on CCTV in 2012, we see her interrogation. And during her interrogation, an officer begins striking her in the face and drags her across the floor. Now, the officer is fired because it's the UK and not the US. He probably fired here too. But Sarah is a Black woman. She's a threat. What is his punishment? 150 hours of community service. And that would be enough if we didn't hear about Sarah's tragic demise. So she starts having visions. Sarah is this exemplar of vulnerability. She begins to have visions. She's seeing her baby's bodily fluids, she says. And she can't shake it. She's having hallucinations. She's admitted to psychiatric care, and while she's in psychiatric care, she's sexually assaulted by a male patient. She fights off the male patient, and in the spirit of criminalizing survivors, she's charged with assault. She's awaiting a psychiatric diagnostic and transferred to Holloway Prison, this infamous women's prison that used to hold suffragettes in the UK. to be determined for their determination to be held whether or not she's fit to stand trial. And while she's there, she's found hung in a cell. She's the last of 22 black women, or 22 women, to have died in the 50-year history. What this is, I will tell you, is the ghost of slavery. Only the ghost is happening across the pond. This is the ghost of partis sequitur ventrum. This is it follows the offspring. It's this law that says that any child born from an enslaved woman basically has none of the rights that any non-slave child would have. They'd be born into slavery. I can have a longer conversation about why, but I'm out of time. But the point here, now I'm not fully out of time. I got another 2 minutes. But the point here is that if we want to understand whether or not there is justice, we have to ask people who are deeply impacted by the justice system, and then we'll see not whether or not a country is just, but whether or not it has any conception of justice. It will know how it plays out. So how should we respond? This is the violence of disregard. This is the presumption of violence that gets us to predict Black death and become accustomed to it. How should we respond? I spent all this time talking about the problem, and now here we are. So I'll say I'll take 1 minute, which I actually. Thank you so much. All right. So, all right. All right. So how should we respond? Well, let's catch up with Lorenzo. So Lorenzo's standing there on the corner, and he doesn't want to go back to prison. He knows if he chokes, he says, I said, what did you do, man? He says, I could have hurt these kids. I said, how might you have done it? He said, man, I don't know. I said, you know. He said, I could have choked those boys out, is what he said. I could have choked those boys. He had the muscle memory of his trade. He knows how he gets down. But he decided not to because he's a hero. And he says, I stood on that corner, man, and I cried. And then he gets on a bus. And he rides a bus to a train, and he takes the train for an hour. And there's a famous experiment in Chicago where faculty send our students on the train because of the deep patterns of residential segregation, and you can just watch the neighborhood change so right around an area called 35th Street, the neighborhood completely changes. It goes from an all Black neighborhood if you're on the south side to an all white neighborhood if you're on the north side. It's a famous experiment. Every faculty worth their salt has done it at some point who work in Chicago. Or maybe all the lazy faculty do it because we know that this gets them every time, right? So anyway, so this is what we do. And so he hops on this train and he rides the train. It's an hour and a half it takes him to get to the halfway house. And he knocks on the door because he hears about this organization, a different organization, not the flop house that he needed to find the $400 to, but this organization that I call Emmaus Road in my writing, that is just quite wonderful. They have housing, and they have this, they embrace this politic of welcome. They take everyone, even though they were sued once because they accepted people who were on the registry, and one person had, quote, broken out of the halfway house and had assaulted somebody, and everybody was attacking them. Everybody was saying, cut their funding, do this, do that. And despite this, when Lorenzo knocks on the door, this is the background for Lorenzo knocking on the door. He knocks on the door. The person opens the door, the case manager, and tells Lorenzo, I'm so sorry, man, we don't have a place for you to stay, but I cannot turn you away. You can sleep on the couch. Sleep on the couch. And he slept there until a room opened. And then when the room opened, he did the program. And we did the program, they loved him. And when they loved him, they hired him first as a groundskeeper. He promoted all the way up to the executive director of the organization. He's been home for 20 years or 10, I don't know. I met him in 2009 or so, but he's been home for years. He hasn't gotten back in trouble. He runs that organization. He has a wife. He's really nice truck that he's showing me, all this sort of thing. And what this tells me is that people and organizations fill in the gaps produced by state failure, part one. In part two, it tells me that another world is possible. Hashtag the title of my next book. And maybe I'll tell you one more story. So these are organizations of people that fill in the gaps left behind by state failure. These are people that make freedom reality, make Black freedom reality in response to Black guilt, despite the vulnerability that they themselves find themselves in. And I could tell you a million stories. I guess the best story I could tell you about would be a story that's very close to home. I could tell you a story about my grandmother's house. Thank you so much. So I met my grandmother. My earliest memories of my grandmother are from a courtroom. My brothers and I were in foster care, and my grandmother. And this is a longer story, but which I won't tell. But I'll tell the story of what my grandmother did, which is my grandmother was standing there in front of that courtroom. She had come to get us. I was 1 year old when I first went to foster care, and we had been in foster homes for 5 or 6 years. And here's my grandmother at the first encounter that I remember, and she's standing in front of this judge, in front of this large mahogany bench, and the judge is uttering some pronouncements, and she is hearing and then utters her own, telling the judge that we need to stay together and that we should live with her. And she takes me and she takes my brothers to her home, and she makes a place for us. And I wondered why she did it. She couldn't afford it. At the height of her income, she made $8 an hour. $8 an hour. And her husband, this man who left Port Gibson, Alabama for the promise of a Chicago steel mill, had just died. He died the year before. So she didn't have the money to raise us. She didn't have the patience really to raise. I mean, she made herself patient, but we were bad kids. We weren't good. We brought the police to our house multiple times. She almost got evicted twice. Why did she let us stay? We got in trouble. We all joined gangs. We got into fights often. Our grades weren't great. You know, we weren't. Why did she let us stay? What did she do? She built an entire ecology around us. I got my first job with her dear friend Don. My job was to polish his porcelain dolls, wash his mirrored walls, and mop his floor. There was a pastor up the street who used to put me on his shoulder and throw a football with me. She had friends come over while we lip sync Michael Jackson over the holidays. So somebody would cheer when we did something we were proud of. She built an entire ecology of freedom around us with people who invested in us, and she did this at great risk to herself. This is the legacy of Black freedom, a sense of belonging that's produced in the face of Black death. And it is a conceptualization of freedom that is not foreign to people who were once enslaved. This is about safety in a group, not about rights, things you can do or can't do. This is about the collective well-being that gets produced in the midst even of catastrophe. Chicago was incredibly violent. I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s. It's much better now. This is the outright rejection of all this death around, and is the relentless pursuit of Black life. And so, what I think that she offered was the embrace of a kind of radical hospitality. This is a politic of welcome and the taking on of vulnerability to make sure that her loved ones and others could thrive. Sometimes this happens with a grand politic in mind. Sometimes this happens because people want a new world or new political economy. Sometimes people want the end of prisons or the end of something massive. But in many cases, it happens in families, through aunties, uncles, cousins, brothers, organizations, formerly incarcerated people who put their bodies on the line, who put their bodies between a bullet and a young person. This work, I hope, is trying to connect the dots between them. And I think there's warrant for this. I think a century of criminological research tells us that employment, housing stability, pro-social bonds, that the recognition of value and putting people in a position where their value can be used leads to a safer world, and perhaps a more just one. So people have asked all kinds of questions. I think there are different theoretical questions we can be asking. I think there are different questions about what to count and how that we could be asking. But I think that the world requires us to ask different questions. How might we welcome the stranger as one? What do people we've thrown away have to do in order to thrive? What world might we make to make that happen? But more importantly, what kind of society do we want to begin with? Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. And now we're opening up the floor to questions. So we have a couple of our students with the mic. So Not even sure we need a mic. It's a pretty small room. We could probably hear.
Okay, so thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. And
I went for a long talk. I mean,
long talks are always about. I was struck by the other sort of the various figures that you talked about, right? So there's the enslaved person, there's the prisoner, but there's also the foreign national and the Muslim. And so I'm wondering if you might say a little bit more about how these figures fit into this idea of Black guilt and this idea of Black freedom.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I will say, the foreign national doesn't necessarily fit. Like, I can stretch it to make it work. I'm thinking about what Black people do in collectives, which I didn't express because I was running out of time and I didn't talk about methods. But I'm curious about what collectives of Black people do to make freedom a reality in the midst of incredible racial violence and terror. And I think the reason why those groups show up in the talk is because we can take lessons from that to understand how to build the world. And Black people are just like, that's just a social relation. Blackness is just a social relation like anything else. And so Blackness just stands in my mind for people who are at the bottom of any social hierarchy. So here would be indigenous people, right? Like it's in Norway it would be Muslims. In London it would be Black people again, but also so-called BAME people. And I think the social factness of that is revealed by looking inside any prison. It's always the group at the bottom. When I was visiting prisons I have a dear friend who's a prison psychologist in Belgrade, and I was visiting a prison about an hour outside of Serbia, and Bosnians were in the prison. Of course they were. You know what I mean? It's like the group at the bottom are the ones that we respond to in this way, which is why so the question for me is like, how do you confront the violence? What I'm calling a violence of disregard, where I don't have to care about what happens to this out group, who's associated with all my troubles, and I think you confront it with freedom. I think freedom is the way to confront it, and so. One more thing on that, and thank you so much for this question. I brought up, for example, Middle Eastern folks, Muslims specifically in Sweden, because the Swedish folks are surprised that there's organized crime emerging from groups that they've said groups who can't participate in the political economy and culture in ways that they find meaningful. And so there's a surprise now that something like 60 murders that have, that is horrible. It's more murders than have ever happened in the history of that country. I think in the last couple years, like, this spike is real, that crime is real, but it is unsurprising that the excluded group would participate in these ways. All criminological research tells us this should happen. And so, which is why I brought up those folks specifically, because they're the group that we hold in fear and disdain.
Thank you so much, Professor Reuben. This is excellent. I wonder if you could fill in some details around political economy, and specifically the halfway house that Lorenzo was getting into. Are you able to describe the funding and regulatory frameworks that was the halfway house strictly funded by the fees that were collected, or?
So one was funded by the fees that were collected and through government contracts. That was the first halfway house, the one that charged them $400. So they would get the $400 came from a voucher given by the state of Illinois to house people for 30 days, which is why he had the 30-day period where he had to hurry up and find some rent. And the other is a evidence-based treatment program. It's like it's got all the bells and whistles. It gets funding from 1,000 sources, has large benefactors, but it's built out, but it's born out of a spirit of what I would call radical hospitality. So this organization itself is formed by is inaugurated by an Episcopal priest who's doing work inside the jails and says, "Okay, brothers, you don't have anywhere to go. You can sleep on my floor." And that's how this organization started about 60 years ago. And from there, he raise money, kind of, at first it was very hand to mouth, and now it's the crown jewel, as it were, of the city. And I would say its name, but everybody studies it also. So, everybody in Chicago, I can't tell you how many researchers I bumped into in this place. Like, get out! Like, this is my spot. There's about to be some violence. Anyway, thank you for your question.
I actually agree with Scott, but you are an optimistic, because at the end, and it was like, yeah, we can do it. So I think my question points to that. It was interesting to me how there was like this division between the state and it's just punished, right? And to reinforce the segregation, marginalization. At the same time, like these organizations, they're not the state, they're the ones that are supposed to build, like that social network. And then I was curious, what is your take about, should the state start being part of rebuilding those connections? Or since like thinking about the U.S., the political spectrum will, and that kind of like that conversation about whether it's the role of the state or not. So what's your take about, should we push the state to entering that sphere, or should we focus on the cases of this organization, your grandmother, are kind of like building those social networks?
No, thank you for that. Yeah. So I think the state has abdicated its responsibility. So like, full stop. I think the state needs to respond with resources, with and there need to be law and policy change. And I try to push for that, in my way. So like, if I get to meet with a policymaker, I'll talk to them. I try to meet with the policymaker, at the level that the policymaker is approaching the question. So if it's a overregulation question, you got it right here. If it's a compassion question about, here you go, like this kind of thing. So I think the state has a deep responsibility. But you point to one of my fears, which is I absolutely don't want to let the state off the hook. And so the state is not good at that. Like, so it's the state's responsibility. But in every state that I've seen, in every country I've visited, if I go inside that prison, I see people at the bottom, to your question earlier. If I go inside that prison, I see people nobody wants. And so I think the state needs to be restructured with the people no one wants in mind. Matthew Desmond wrote a book, a book recent, like a couple years ago, called Poverty by America. And there's a line in the book where he says, "There's no flag for the poor," is what he says. And it's a perfect line to me. And it is absolutely true. Like in this, like, we don't even talk about, if I don't know if you follow our politics at all, but there's no discussion of the poor, the abject. If we talk about the mentally ill or something like that, it's as a function of charity. There's a way that we understand the vulnerable. We don't talk about, like, the vulnerable don't have a champion, and I'm not saying needs one. I'm saying, that's not our politics. Our politics are the working and middle class. Our politics are whoever can get me more power. You know what I mean? And so what I'm trying to do is say we can learn from the powerless, and we can or less powerful, I should say, and perhaps we can bring something beyond a light and something that we can use. Maybe we can bring something like resources to generate more power among the less powerful, or something like that. Yeah, thank you for that. But it is absolutely my biggest fear that the thing I write that matters to people would be, like, if I write a thing that anybody cares about, that it would be something that lets the state off the hook, for example. You know what I mean? Like, that would be the thing. Okay, I'm just gonna go on a tour and bash black people. Then I'm just gonna be like the next Shelby Steele or like maybe like, I'll just join Clarence Thomas and those dudes. Like, I'm gonna go on a speaking tour and talk about how terrible black people are now. If that happens, then that's next. I might as well just go get my checks, right? Like, yeah. Anyway.
So, I find it very hard nowadays when I pick up notes about mystical news culture not to conclude that we're encouraged to enjoy our peace. And in fact, they don't mean much encourages it. And when you see youth narratives of terrible violence,
we're not supposed to like that, but we are supposed to like the victim impact statement and the sentencing judge. And it seems to me that part of the other side, the culture along with the distaste for the vulnerable, is the thrill of punishment. And you have to start pushing uphill by saying, actually, we don't really like violence. Because actually we're encouraged to love it.
The challenge of writing about and caring about, as all of us in the room do. When I say care, I mean care as in like literal care, but also care as in the object of my work. So in those two ways, people the rest of the world don't care much about, don't care to hear their stories, don't care, and so that's a part of the problem, is like this, the bloodlust, like get these guys at all costs. I think it's a part of what we see in the U.S. right now. It's certainly what I'm seeing. Like I think we've Adam Seward, like there's a phrase that's really famous now. It's like the cruelty is the point. So he writes this article, about that to reflect the political environment that we see in the U.S. I think we undercount the satiation that people feel from the harm that another causes. I'm not sure though that this is a longer discussion, but I don't know what to do with that though either, because I don't know that the law shouldn't give some satisfaction. Like should the state offer, for example, satisfaction when one is harmed? Is that a part of the healing that the person needs, or the step to the next thing? Do they need to feel some pleasure or get something out of the punishment of the other? I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. And so anyway, I'll think about that for a long time. But I agree. That was a long way to say I agree, but I do agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And let me join with others who have suggested that this was certainly not only interesting, but I would say brilliant. I think you were to say bring some ideas to the fore, which otherwise would have been on notice. My interest is in the concept you raised about the emergence of the convict system after emancipation. As you said, in parallels with the Caribbean, laws which made it an offense and criminalized certain types of behavior, offenses of idleness and indolence and that sort of thing. But you then also went on to speak, I think it was of your grandmother, who created this ecosystem of freedom. I was wondering whether if you place that within the context of, for example, the hegemonic discourse on public order, on the one hand, with the criminalization and the emergence of the convict system, and then you put your grandmother's role, if you see that as part of a discourse of resistance to that, and embedded within that a whole new cultural approach. Have you had a chance to maybe look at that? And as you're at it, I was wondering, did you notice any differences between, say, the rate of incarceration in the South, where some of that may have been more prevalent, of course, sugarcane and the cotton, and the North, which may have had a different experience? Did you observe many differences in terms of the rate of impact?
Oh, thank you so much.
You understand what I'm saying?
I totally get it. I know 100%. I think I get it. And if I don't get it, tell me I got it wrong. But on okay, so let me think about, do I see differences in rates of incarceration? Yes, absolutely. So like there's empirical
grandmothers and what happened there.
I got you. That 100%. Got you.
Sure, and that what you call the ecosystem of freedom.
Yeah, thank you.
Counterpose those two.
I love it. I got you. And I think we wrote back here. Because the ecosystem or the ecology or the network or like whatever we land on later, which I'm hoping to sharpen through conversation, is the response to this problem people of the world just doesn't want. You know what I mean? Like I think this is what I'm arguing at least. there's empirical data that suggests that slave holding, like places like counties, for example, the county levels. Like think about there's a sociologist, Christopher Mullen, who's done a lot of this work, who finds that counties that were like slaveholding counties just have higher incarceration rates than places that weren't. And so the empirical data suggests this is the case. Like disparate and awful and ridiculous incarceration that outpaces every other place. Let me give you an example. One example of that would be the U.S. was the world's leader in incarceration every year until about 2 years ago when El Salvador displaced it because of the state of exception in El Salvador. But the incarceration rates in El Salvador, which are about 1,000 per 100,000 people, and Louisiana, which are just under 1,000 per 100,000 people, are the same, are ostensibly the same. And so to give you like an empirical point on that case, I think that is the case. That doesn't mean Illinois, with its 45,000 prisoners on any given day held in its institutions, which is a northern free state, is not ridiculous. Like, it is completely ridiculous. Okay. But to this, the ecology or the ecosystem of freedom, yes, it is a direct I think it is a direct response to the world around it. And so she built this caring network around us as Black boys growing up in the 1980s and 90s. So my year of high school, 1994, in my city, Chicago, there were like 960 something murders, like 963 or something like that year. That was just community violence. But there's also police violence. Leonard Clarke, a young Black boy who wandered into the wrong neighborhood, was beaten into a disability by white residents who were never prosecuted. And there was a game that was quite famous that the police played with little Black boys, where they pick them up and drop them off in the middle of white neighborhoods in the 1980s. And so I lived in, not a white neighborhood, obviously, but I lived in a Black neighborhood on one of those edges. I lived in Bronzeville, but my neighborhood was right around this area, 35th Street. Every time we walked across 35th Street, we get rocks thrown at us. What the police would do was pick up our friends and drop them off in those neighborhoods. And the touches from the police would start at, 9, 10, 11 years old. Now that's the historical world. That's the moment in history that my grandmother was raising us in. And in response to that, she builds the network. But if you look at a Maroon society, you see something very similar with right. Like, so if you look at it, so if I trace her family line, which is what I'm trying to do in this book, there's an encampment right outside of a plantation in New Orleans called Bas de Fleuve. And in Bas de Fleuve, there's a security network. It's a place where escaped slaves ran from the plantation and lived for 15 years. They created their own economy. They worked with indigenous people. They got gunpowder and food from slaves in the other plantations to live. These were the networks of these kind of survival networks that they built, where they figured out how to live together, both enslaved people, free people, and then they went and sold artisanal crafts in New Orleans, in Congo Square, a very famous square, where they were able to sort of hawk their wares that they built. They would sell wood to other plantations, these escaped slaves. It is wild and beautiful, and it is a response to the social situation that they found themselves in. Sometimes that looked like resistance intentionally, and sometimes it looked like just figuring out how to live together.
Okay, folks, I've been given I appreciate it. I'm sure we could stay here all night asking questions, but we do have a reception, and everyone will have a chance to ask questions and converse further on these issues. Thank you very much, and I'll turn down.
Well, thank you, Professor Miller. We have a wonderful gift for you, so thank you. And would love for you to open it and show, because it is our landmark gift. And so now you've been officially inaugurated.
Aha. Yes. Thank you.
Justice is critical. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really a phenomenal talk for us today, thinking about the legal production of vulnerability, the ecology of freedom, and of course, a form of radical hospitality. You've really inspired us to do better, to think better, and to push beyond the limits. Optimistic or not, it gives us something to take away. I'd like to wrap up then by thanking, because in many ways we've finished the formal portion of this evening, but I'd like to take a moment to thank a range of persons who made this night possible. And first, to the Edwards family for sharing their father's legacy with us. We thank you. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, of course, Woodward's College, that has historically co-sponsored this event, and we thank the acting principal of Woodsworth, Karen Reed, as well as Barbara Track, the executive director of advancement and alumni communication, who has been with us every step of the way in planning this event. I'd also like to thank another co-sponsor, the Faculty of Law, Dean Jutta Brunet, who is another co-sponsor and historically been a co-sponsor for this event. From our center, we have a Edwards Committee organizing committee, and really we started from midsummer to do the hard work. And I really, to Catherine Edwards, thank you. I mean, Catherine Evans, thank you. Lots of Edwards here. Thank you, Catherine. To Rebecca Melville, we thank you, the center manager, Meng Zhao, who's not here, but really was the key coordinator and helped to pull this together. We thank her and the undergraduate and graduate program. Of course, thank you for your contribution. This event, really, the organization of this event would not have been possible without the tremendous work of Pat Daughtry. And Pat, of course, she's in the back still working, the communications and events coordinator. She really has been phenomenal, and we would not be here today. From scouting out rooms to negotiating contracts to a whole, the list goes on, and it's been really wonderful to work with Pat. Her vision, her expertise, her just in every way, in every CRIMSL event, it's Pat that's at the back and the forefront of making it possible. So thank you, Pat, truly, for the work that you do. And of course, Pat always works with a wonderful team, and she reminds you that she couldn't do this tremendous work without her team of undergraduates. And in this case, it's Ali Bradley. Is Ali here? Can you stand? Okay, Ali, you've been phenomenal. Thank you. You really do represent what Edwards would have stood for. So thank you for your ongoing commitment. And we also have Amelia Wilson, one of our newer work study students and collaborators. So thank you, Amelia. Your excellent planning and the logistics, and of course the reliability, and really our students, our graduates and our students, you represent just that. To Beatrix Doma, the CRIMSL undergraduate coordinator, as well as Bilal Khan, the alumni relations operator. Are they here? Okay, so you can just send the message. We thank them for their work and assisting us with the alumni engagement portion of this. And to CRIMSA, our undergraduate student association, Charley McNeil and Breanna Lamanche, our wonderful undergraduate students who assisted with this event. Thank you. As well as Devrat Godara, Charlie Ma, Alicia Jaldo, and Ada Lee. And to our IT support and my phenomenal executive assistant, Edward Echelon, thank you for all of your work and your commitment, the technical assistance and everything that you do. Thank you for that. And Santa Guida. So we're really transitioning to the next portion, which is our catered portion of the event, and with Santa Guida, of course. I think do we own stocks yet with Santa Guida? It's like, what are we having? Santa Guida again, but of different forms. And as I end, I just want to take a moment to offer gratitude to our alumni for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see the expansive legacy of Professor Edwards and the Center for Criminology and Sociolegal Studies in this room. And last year, we announced the creation of alumni awards celebrating the accomplishments of our graduate. And I'm pleased to say that tomorrow, in this same room at 6:30, we'll host part 2 of our Edwards lecture event. And it's the inauguration of our distinguished alumni lecture and awards night. In many ways, we see it as part 2 of what we've started here today, which is why it's the next day. But it's exceptionally special. And many of you have already met and remember Professor Ranisa Mawani, who will be delivering our inaugural Distinguished Alumni Lecture, sort of the Edwards Lecture Part 2. And in the future years, it will continue to be part of what it'll be one day, etc. But this is truly our inaugural event. And so she will receive the 2025 Distinguished Alumni Award alongside with, and he is also here, if you can also stand, Dr. Giancarlo Fiorella. And Ranisa, if you can just stand so in case people might not. Yes, thank you. And so tomorrow, so in the case of Giancarlo, he, of course, is receiving the CRIMSL 2025 Emerging Leader Impact Award. And we have a video and an introduction. I mean, it will be a phenomenal evening. We'll have a wonderful talk and the award ceremony, as well as their own acceptance speeches and reflections on what CRIMSL and U of T meant to them at the time that they were here. So you're all invited to attend. We hope that you will join us. And there'll be a reception and wine and lots of time for people to connect. We're hoping our graduates, our current graduates, or our graduates, our alumni, as well as our current students, undergraduate and graduate students, will be here. And then finally, it's important for us to, I guess this is what you call sophisticated begging, support and donations. I just want to be, and you'll get some of this tomorrow as well, but I want to encourage those of you who are able to support the next generation of scholars and practitioners by contributing to the projects and initiatives that resonate with you professionally. And of course, during a time of new budget cuts and a new budget model, your generosity can certainly help to continue to build and envision the kind of future that we want to see, the kind of research, the kind of community-based commitments that CRIMSL represents in this contemporary moment. And so you'll see at the front, as you're leaving, there's a purple paper here. And if you're so moved, please pick up the paper. It shows you how you can give and contribute to particular projects. And that's simply if there are particular projects you want to see, or if you think that undergraduate and graduate training might be supplemented by particular awards or scholarships or funding for graduate students, often who live in precarious situations, in a context like, or a city like Toronto that's very expensive, are undergraduates who often need support. And recognition for the tremendous work that some of them and many of them actually do. So do feel free to pick up that purple paper and feel free to donate $5, $10, $20 to name what it is you're interested in supporting. We welcome that. And you'll get a little more of that tomorrow at the alumni event. And so now on to the fun stuff. And of course, our conversations don't have to end here. This is where we move into informal discussions and people reconnecting, because I see a lot of wonderful people, conversations, friends who are here. It's really wonderful to see the cross section. And so what we'll do now is I'm going to, of course, thank Professor Miller again for the wonderful talk, and thank you for setting us up for another Edwards lecture. You've really motivated us and pushed us to think about what is possible, what kind of future is possible, and where we go from here. And what we'll do is there'll be food set up. I know the caterers are already here and the food is ready. What we'll just need to do, if people can stand in as soon as I end, and just push your chairs over the people who are on the left. I know Pat is there and she'll direct how that will work. And within five or a few minutes, the food spread will come out, and we'll have time to engage with one another. So thanks again for coming. And we hope to see you tomorrow at day 2 of this celebration. Thanks again. Bye-bye.